So in our last video for chapter 10, which I said it's a quite short chapter, we want to introduce the model we're going to use in future chapters in order to understand growth and especially the role of capital and technology in thinking about growth. And so in order to do that, what we need to do is introduce a more complicated production function than we had in the medium run, right? In the medium run, we were really interested in the labor market and especially the flows into and out of the labor market and the unemployment rate. And so we just had output be equivalent to employment. And that's not completely unreasonable because we can think, all right, in the short term, capital levels are pretty fixed. Even in the medium run, they're not going to change drastically. But now when we're thinking about long-run economic growth, we definitely want to think about the role that investing in capital plays and then the sort of state of technology, right? And technology is actually, going to be really important in our thinking about growth. So, all right, we're going to have our aggregate production function. And remember, Y is just real GDP. And then we have some function of K for capital and N for labor. Now, you'll always see K for capital. Sometimes you will see L for labor. But this is what the book uses. So we have output depends on how we combine our capital. And so what do we mean by capital? Well, we mean all of the stuff that we use to make other stuff. So that includes factories, machines, trucks, airplanes, computers, land, all of that can be considered capital. And then how we combine those is captured in that F function, right? That's the state of technology. And so obviously the state of technology in 2021 is significantly higher than it was in 1950. We can do a whole lot more things than we could do in 1950, and the level of technology in 1950 was significantly higher than it was in, say, 1900. The key piece, I think, is thinking about the relationship between capital and technology. In this model, we have sort of capital as a separate entity, which we probably measure in dollars, just sort of the value of capital, and then technology as a, sort of something that lays on top of it. In actual fact, of course, the technology is usually embedded both within the capital, right? What are the machines that we have, right? We have lasers as part of our capital now, which we never had in 1900. And it's also, of course, embedded in the workers, right? In N, because the workers need to know how to use this capital. And so I think that's going to be really important. We want to sort of think about that. We could have, either increasing returns to scale, decreasing returns to scale, or whatever. We're going to make the assumption that we have constant returns to scale, which basically means if we double everything, all of our inputs, then we double our output. That's not completely unreasonable, right? If we, have a country that's producing so much and we have the exact same country over here producing the same amount, then we'll have twice as much output. And we're going to assume that we have decreasing returns to both inputs. So adding more capital will increase output, but at a decreasing rate, right? So it will be a concave production function. And the same with labor. Increasing labor will increase output, but at a decreasing rate. So if you want to have the constant returns to scale, you need to add the same amount of capital and labor. If you just add one, you won't get as much increase in the output. So one of the ways that we can sort of simplify things is thinking of everything in terms of workers, right? We said one of the things that we said in, I think, the first video of chapter 10 was that what we really care about is output per worker. And we want to think about what causes that to grow. Because if we're just adding workers and that's why output's going up, then it doesn't mean we have more to eat. So we're going to divide through everything by N, and we're going to get output per worker on the left-hand side, and then capital per worker on the right-hand side. So output per worker will be some function of capital per worker, and then just this constant one. And so if we increase capital per worker, then we're going to move along our production function and we'll increase output, but it will be concave, right? So we'll have decreasing returns. And then if we increase technology, then that will shift up our production function, right? So, and we want to think about what that means. That means that for any amount of capital per worker, we're able to produce more. And that's because we have more technology. And so this is probably accurate if we measure capital in terms of like dollars, like value of dollars. But in order to increase technology, often what we need to do is replace that capital, right? You can't build a 2021 car with a 1950s factory. You need to have a 2021 factory. And you can't just, add another 1950s factory and say, oh, okay, I've got twice as much capital per worker. Can I produce a 2021 car now? No, you've got to get rid of that old capital and turn it, and then build the new capital. So I think that's really important. But capital accumulation is really important, right? It's going to be important for growth. And capital accumulation will come through savings, right? Because when we produce something, we can, when we have output, GDP, we can either consume or we can invest, right? Y equals C plus I plus G. And investment, that I, is what capital, is where capital comes from, right? And so we're going to have to think about the role of capital accumulation and the savings rate, both for growing in a country like the United States, which already is one of the richest countries in the world, and also for a country like, say, India, where you have lots and lots of workers, and really what they need is more capital in order to be productive, in order to be more productive. And then we'll think about that technological progress, right, and improving that state of technology. So here is, the production function. This is what it's going to look like. So we have our input now is capital per worker, right? So that's K over N. And our output is output per worker. So that's on the vertical axis. And you can see basically what this is saying is that each time we add additional inputs, we get more output, right? It keeps going up, but at a smaller and smaller rate. And so we have it starts out steep and then it gets flatter and flatter. And that represents the decreasing returns to capital. So if you give people, more capital to work with, they'll be more productive. You give them more capital to work with, they'll be more productive, but not by as much more. And eventually the capital will run out. And then if we want to think about how we would graph an increase in technology, that's going to be a shift up in the production function. So here we can have the same value of capital per worker at A, but if we have a better production function, then we can produce at B prime instead of at A prime. And the spoiler is basically that we think long run growth really comes from increases in technology. Now, as I said, a lot of that has to do, so you need the capital, but you can't just keep increasing capital forever. But you do have to increase the technology embedded in that capital. And so we'll talk about that as well as we go through sort of the next three chapters, 11, 12, and 13. So we'll see the role that the savings rate plays in growth. We'll see that there is a maximum level of output per worker that you can achieve by increasing your capital. It's not a maximum level of output per worker, I should say. It's a maximum level of consumption per worker. Eventually you are, all of your output goes to investment and people have nothing to eat and so they die. That's counterproductive. So eventually you need to rely on technology. And I think we want to think about whether economists think about this in the right way.